Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing all right today. I have a bonus upload for you. Before we get into this, upload a couple of links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They are written, researched by Tom Lyons, narrated, and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken too much of your time. Let's get on with today's bonus upload. Shall we? Well, here in the great states of America, we have lots of terrifying places, mountain ranges such as the Great Smokies, the Appalachians, the Crazies, and the Superstitions that all hold secrets, missing persons, Dogman, Sasquatch encounters, and other things that are unexplainable. But we are not the only country to have such things happen. We are going to take a little adventure down under. Marrijig, Victoria, Australia. A blanket of fog hanging before him. Lachlan Culkin saddled up his horse one autumn morning and set off into the remote high country of southern Australia to find two campers that had gone missing. Arriving at the grassy plain where they had pitched their tent, Mr. Culkin was taken aback by what he saw. The campsite was burned to the ground, with the campers' charred belongings heaped in a pile. Deer carcasses were strewn about the valley. The campers were nowhere to be found. There was nothing natural about it, Mr. Cacklin said, a 26-year-old cattle herder. More than a year later, the disappearance of the campers Russell Hill and Carol Clay, both in their 70s, remains unsolved. Speculation has swirled. Was it a fatal run-in with illegal deer hunters? A ruse so campers, who were not married to each other, could run away together? Around campfires, tall tales have blossomed in the absence of answers. Often they revolve around a local recluse known as the Button Man, who dwells in the woods near the campsite and spends his time carving buttons out of antlers. There is no evidence that the Button Man had anything to do with the disappearances, or even saw Mr. Hill or Mrs. Clay at their campsite. Nonetheless, his mere presence in this foreboding terrain has captured the national imagination. The embodiment in this vast country of strange allure and abating fear of places so distant they can swallow people without a sound. The rumors and stories, both about the Button Man and the missing campers, reflect an intimate desire to find explanations for the unexplainable. But for a century and beyond, these mountains, more than most places, have held their secrets tightly. A string of misfortune. The cattlemen who once roamed the rugged country stretching hundreds of miles northeast of Melbourne say it's an easy place to disappear if you're not careful or if you want to. Dingoes prowl the land howling in the black of night. Clear skies can turn to snow in a blink. Even in summer, most of the landscape is accessible only by horse or four-wheel drive in the warmer months, and not at all in the winter. It's remote and beautiful and unpredictable, says Graham Stoney, 81, a local cattleman. It creates its own legends and its own mysteries. Within its wilderness, a string of hikers, campers have met similar fate to Mr. Hill and Mrs. Clay in recent years. In 2008, Warren Meyer, 57, an experienced hiker, set out on a relatively easy 6-mile walk in the national park on a warm fall day and was never seen again. Potential clues accumulated. An escapee from a psychiatric ward who had homicidal tendencies was spotted around the area where Mr. Meyer had vanished. Some people in the area report hearing gunfire within the same period. During a search, a marijuana plantation was uncovered, but Mr. Meyer's disappearance was never solved. 3 years later, the head of Melbourne Prison, David Prideaux, 50, went missing while deer hunting in these mountains. Some speculated that his disappearance might be related to a prison killing of a gangland leader under his watch. For years afterwards, supposed sightings of Mr. Prideaux were reported around the country. In July of 2019, Conrad Whitlock, 72, unexplainably left his house at 3 in the morning and drove to the high country. When police later found his car abandoned on the side of the road, his jacket, phone, and wallet were present, but he was not. 3 months later, Niles Becker, an avid bushwalker, vanished in the middle of a 5-day hike. He had trained for months for this outing, which was timed for his 39th birthday. And then in March of 2020, Mr. Hill and Miss Clay set out for what they told their families would be a week-long camping trip, although they had not mentioned that they would be going together. Once they arrived at their campsite in a wide valley nestled between snow-capped mountains, Mr. Hill, an amateur radio enthusiast, dialed in to let fellow hobbyists know where he was. That was the last time anyone had ever heard from either of them. The bush is very unforgiving, the Australian bush, Greg Paul, a senior police officer, said at a news conference last year, after Mr. Hill and Miss Clay disappeared. The police do not believe that any of the cases are linked, but that has not stopped people from wondering. It's an extraordinary coincidence that this many people have gone missing, Mr. Stoney, the cattleman, said. But you would hope they've all just misstepped and nothing else is involved. The original case, one mystery in this land of secrets that has outlasted all the rest, and still haunts local residents, many of whom are descendants of the chief protagonist. It involves a double murder that took place 103 years ago. The sweltering summer, the body of Jim Barclay, 48, was found in a shallow grave not far from the cattle station he managed. Suspicion immediately fell upon another person, the only other person who lived there. John Bamford, who cooked for Mr. Barclay, but Mr. Bamford could not be questioned by authorities. He had vanished, only to turn up dead 9 months later, a bullet lodged in his skull. No one was ever charged with those murders. The most common theory is that Mr. Barclay was killed by Mr. Bamford, who was in turn shot by a friend of Mr. Barclay's in revenge, but people also speculate about an affair that Mr. Barclay was rumored to be having. Others say the two men could have had an altercation with cattle thieves. Around the valley, the grandchildren of people directly or indirectly involved in the case are now in their 70s and 80s. Each family has passed down its own version of events, and they often contradict each other or the official record. There's been many accusations from many families, and many names tarnished, said Keith Lydon, a historian who wrote the book about the murders. The prevailing sentiment is that the whole affair is best left with the ghosts. You try to ask a mountain cattleman, and he'll say, "We don't talk about that up here," Mr. Lydon says. One of those men is Rob Choppy Purcell, now retired. His silhouette, one of the 4 men on horseback, is on a logo of the local pub in the town of Mary Jig, at the base of the mountains. It was also on the beer cozy he was holding. Lots of people have written books about the area, but they don't know what they are talking about, Mr. Parcell said. He spoke with the conviction of someone who knows more than the official record, but he was not willing to divulge details, not to outsiders. Bruce McCormick, 63, whose family was one of the first to settle the area, told the story of how his grandfather, a good friend of one of the slain men, went down the valley to investigate, not long after the murders. He stayed there for 3 months, Mr. McCormick said. And his message when he returned was justice was done and to leave it alone. There's people who know more, but they're all dying, Mr. McCormick added. And I'm not saying too much more either. A man of legend. More than 100 years after the murders, a local resident again tried to make sense of the loss of two people in uncertain circumstances. A new set of tales blurring the line between truth and urban legend has emerged. These stories center on the Button Man. Locals emphasize that they don't actually think that the bush-inhabited recluse, whose real name is unknown, had anything to do with the disappearances. There's no indication that the police consider him a person of interest, but his name first became linked to the case because he reportedly told the police that he had encountered Mr. Becker, the hiker who vanished 5 months before Mr. Hill and Miss Clay. With little ease to explain the disappearances, attention has focused on the Button Man. This almost assuredly unwelcome. Locals who say visitors now come to the mountains hoping for a run-in with the man of legend worry about his safety. Campers and hikers say the Button Man appears out of the woods without a sound. Sometimes he has a nice chat with them. Other times he seems agitated and grills them about what they are doing. In some of the stories told by those who have encountered him, he asks, "Do you want to see my button collection?" or occasionally, "Do you want to see my axe collection?" There are other stories less frequently told. People who know him a bit better refer to him by a friendly moniker as Buttons. He's rumored to be helping a university collect data about high country and to have lived in Melbourne during the winter. Those who see Buttons coming through Mansfield, a regional hub where campers often stock up before heading further into the mountains, say he is friendly and polite as he stops to get his car fixed or grab a bite to eat. But many also joke to the hikers before they set out into the valley. Be careful of the Button Man. It's just become a tall story told around campfires, a local resident, Ben Large, said from behind the counter of the Mansfield bike shop. In the light of day, the cattlemen who know the valley best see its mysteries as more than individual cases of bad luck strung together by coincidence. But when pressed, they are reluctant to completely rule out the possibility that there is something else going on. They share other stories of the mountains, a hulking, hairy creature that visits campers in the darkness. Hikers who find photos of themselves on their cameras taken by an unknown hand. It's easy to imagine that something could be lurking in the bush when night falls. Fog covers the mountains, and the tree branches scraping together against the roofs sound like it's alive. Darkness plays funny games, said Charlie Lovick, 71, a local farmer who finds new homes for retired racehorses. That's why you keep the fire going all night. Just a little interesting story I wanted to share with you guys. Now, what I got out of that story was, there's a string of bad luck going on. A shit ton of missing people. 103 years ago, there was a brutal murder, a mishap, pretty much like our old Wild West. But that has nothing to do with these new cases, obviously enough. Then everybody you spoke with, everything eventually alluded to this Button Man, an urban legend. I mean, do we really know if the Button Man's real? Could be just a guy that the police were talking to, and who knows? Even the locals there don't know, or maybe they do. But then the last statement from Charlie Lovick. Darkness plays funny games. That's why you keep the fire going all night. They share other stories of the mountains, a hulking, hairy creature who visits campers in the darkness. hikers who find photos of themselves on their cameras taken by an unknown hand. You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like to me what we've got going on in our country. And that's not a coincidence. And there is no link connecting the two because, I mean, Australia is pretty much the furthest place from America. Mary Jig is the furthest place from the superstitions, the crazies, the Appalachians, the Great Smokies, the Rockies. But yet, the stories and the speculation all sound the same to me that goes on here. Crazy pot farmers, monsters in the dark. Well, if I had to put my money on it, and my guess, I'd go with the monster in the dark. How about you? I hope you guys enjoyed today's bonus upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. And yeah, I am going to be working on the second channel, the Urban Exploration Ghost Hunting. Now I've just got to come up with a good name and set a date for it to start. But we'll discuss that a little further down the road. Not too further, though. Anyway, with that, I want to bid you farewell. Thank you so much for all your support, and see ya!